You could accept the fact that the city is headed for a disaster of biblical proportion.
The older he got, the more Norman Lear became the symbol of something that he never agreed to be, but nevertheless was, up until his death Tuesday, at the age of 101, the infinitely thoughtful, creatively productive, intelligently spoken, and most elder citizen of the great American ideal, always open to what's next, what's happening, and what's now. I don't wake up in the morning to be old, Lear told me during an October 2017 day I spent with him for the Washington Post profile. I wake up to do things that were on my mind when I fell asleep last night. At the time, Norman Lear was 95. He had been out the night before, very late, watching Dave Chappelle and others at a comedy club. He said that once he turned 90, he noticed that people applauded his presence alone, regardless of the occasion or work at hand. He was still learning to be gracious about that. The beloved, good-humored old man in the trademark white boater hat walk into any room and they all stand and smile at you. His advanced age had become yet another feature of a person whose influence on television and cultural life was already part of history and still part of its present. He had finished work on a second season of an eventful 4 of Netflix's One Day at a Time, a funny and remarkably modern reboot of one of the 1970s sitcoms classics. That afternoon, he would take a call from a producing partner on a series he was eager to make about getting old, tentatively titled Guess Who Died? A couple of years later, ABC and late night host Jimmy Kimmel dabbled in a completely unnecessary yet engagingly irresistible experiment: live prime time reenactments of memorable episodes of Lear's sitcoms. All in the Family, The Jeffersons, with Lear himself occupying a center seat of honor in the show's studio audience, applauded again for still being here and still being Norman Lear. It was fun, yet there was also something subliminally wistful about the whole affair. Some mutual acknowledgement that Lear's style of sitcom, unabashedly topical, emotionally raw, empathetic yet hilarious, filmed with multiple cameras, live before a studio audience, had become a revered artifact. The new One Day at a Time got rave reviews and yet lived its short life entirely under the cancellation axe. Archie Bunker, Maude, George Jefferson, the actors who originally played them by them were all dead. It was hard to avoid wondering how Lear truly felt about all this retro reverence. He was sentimental about his childhood, about his World War II service, about his country, and about his kids, but not overly nostalgic. He loved the present with all its attendant problems. He spent his life, the moment, the television moments, the political moments, the cultural moments, to such a degree that it's difficult to think that he's now actually gone. Hardly any of us will get to our old age the way that Norman Lear did. And yet, we seem to believe it's widely possible, in no small part because a fair number of our celebrities, including the pioneers of TV, Lear, Betty White, Carl Reiner, Bob Newhart, Mel Brooks, Dick Van Dyke, they all made it look so effortless. But you and I both know that it's not. The wellness industry, AARP, and so many others try to sell us the dream of optimally fabulous old age. Even as TikTok flips up lately with millennials in their late 30s complaining about back pain. Lear was all the proof anyone needs that a charmed life is both charmed and earned. And when it comes to aging, his response to it fit neatly with what his TV shows taught us all along. Life is not easy. Life is not fair. But how people live their life is fascinating. And perhaps the secret is to remain deeply curious about how life goes for other people. His memoir and interviews, Lear talked about being a boy in New York and wandering on elevated subway rides. What was going on in each and every apartment and house and train that passed? What's for dinner? What are they talking about? Early television's attempts to answer this were overly sweet and ordered. Lear and his collaborators came along and suggested that the manners within the American household could be loud and rude and fraught with divides over almost any issue: politics, race, class, gender, religion, sex, money, the biggies, and tangled up in personal biases and the wounds of the human condition. Love could and should exist in there too. And all of this could also be in a perfectly placed swerve of comic timing. Hilarious. The only way to understand the lives of these fictional other people is to eavesdrops from the fourth wall and accept them as they are, to the point where their responses and behaviors adhere to a formula that fits into 22 minutes of television. On this side of the fourth wall, we have the luxury of not having to wrap up our personal crisis at the half-hour mark, and at least the delusion that our lives do not hew to the formula when they so often do. Watching those sitcoms, America became like Lear on those train rides, desperate to look in. And so, by the millions, experience an electronic togetherness. Another word for it is empathy. Another thing to remember, which was very important to Lear, was that in World War II, he had been one to open the bay doors of a B-17 and watch bombs descend on towns below, also filled with houses, filled with families, at dinner tables, also having conversations, also filled with stories he longed to know. Empathy was a constant in Lear's work and in his public life. As founder for People for the American Way, in which the principles and points of view evident in his television shows, it is possible to reason with a bigot like Archie Bunker. What's life like for a self-made black businessman who moves with his family to a deluxe apartment in the sky? What options are available for Maud during an unplanned pregnancy? Applied to a political and social sphere, what if our decisions were based on acceptance and bridging our differences? What if we could truly and honestly relate instead of siphoning ourselves into the niche audiences and markets? By 2017, Lear had experienced the gall of watching Americans cruelly disregard one another's experiences, backgrounds, and beliefs in a tidal shift of populist politics. Television itself was deep into its own fragmentation process of streaming services, offering hundreds of new TV comedies, dramas, which had a way of undoing communal experiences. Hence, Kimmel's fond desire to recreate old-fashioned sitcom broadcast, if only for a night or two. Lear talked to me about his nightly habit of getting in bed and watching an entire MSNBC lineup of fresh outrages coming about Donald Trump's Washington. I asked Lear whether it was sometimes all too much for a non-agrarian to bear. Did he envy the many friends and loved ones who had already passed and were therefore spared on some nights after too much MSNBC had begun to look like the end of everything decent, constitutional, and free? The things that he held dear, I had absent-mindedly brought my hand to my mouth as I listened to his answer. You know what Norman Lear did? He laughed. Why would anyone want out? I'm much more involved with the wonder or the acceptance as a kind of miracle that you just put your hand up and put your finger near to your lip. It took you every effing split second of your life to get to do that. And several seconds more to hear me say what I'm saying. It took me every split second of my life, 95 years, months, weeks, hours, and days to say what I'm saying now and to shake my head yet again. So, does that say something about the moment and the importance of the moment? We're living in a world where everyone, all the billions of them, live so we can sit here right now and have this conversation. That moment faded into my past and his. But the lesson was clear. Norman Lear wasn't planning to go anywhere anytime soon. And he had left me with what felt like his best advice. Stick around and see how the show ends for as long as it is airing. And never stop wondering about the world around you and the feelings and interactions of the human characters in it. Norman Lear passed away Tuesday. Norman Lear was 101. And Norman Lear did what we could all wish that we could do, and that is set the standard, raise the bar, change the culture, bring in awareness to the culture. Something we all think about, whether or not directly, but maybe mentally, on a day-to-day basis. Norman Lear, an anchor, and someone who set the motion and brought the culture and the questions that we all ask on a day-to-day basis. And throughout that, made us laugh in the process. Humor is the best medicine, regardless of what you may think. And it's someone like Norman Lear that brings that to us. And all we need to do is thank him for sitcom after sitcom. And of course, the good times. As we all move up, because we all know that those were the days. Broadcasting live from the WDCE studios out of the University of Richmond, you're listening to 90.1 FM. From the most trusted puppet in media. Reporting since Roswell, I'm Sam Newsman, and this is Saturday morning.
Television City in Hollywood.